Penguin Random House Audio presents Skeleton Keys, The Secret Life of Bone by Brian Switek. Read for you by Will Damron. Introduction. Cut to the bone. When Geza Yermeni decided to take his own life, he turned to a blade. Precisely what was tormenting the 70-year-old Eastern European shepherd is a secret kept by his remains. The tiny placard affixed beneath his toothless skull in a cabinet of wood and glass at downtown Philadelphia's Mutter Museum doesn't say whether it was financial stress, heartache, or any of the other painful circumstances of human life that led him to choose his own way out. But the post-mortem grin formed by his jaws speaks to what happened next. What Yermeni didn't know when he raised the cutting edge to his neck was that part of his throat had transformed to bone. This happens to everyone to a greater or lesser extent. The flexible cartilage of your larynx, the ringed tube that gives you that distinctive part of yourself, your voice, slowly but surely starts to change as you age, rigid bone cells growing in place of the more pliant flesh. Yermeni's tissues were a little more ambitious than most. As he swiped the blade across his neck, he met unexpected resistance. His larynx had been so transmuted that it formed a bony strut in his neck. In the more clinical terms of the Mutter Museum signage, wound not fatal because of ossified larynx. That little note doesn't record what Yermeni felt when he realized his failure, but the scar that must have formed on his neck was a mark of a happier ending. Yermeni, the display says, lived until 80 without melancholy. Bone saved Yermeni's life. The Lucky Herdsman's skull is one of 139 in the Hertel Skull Collection exhibit, the last resting place for dozens of people who perished during the second half of the 19th century in Central and Eastern Europe. Each skull has its own story, recounted in a passive voice shorthand that makes the collected tales swing between the somber and the tragicomic. There's the bony grin of Franziska Secora, a 19-year-old Viennese prostitute who died of meningitis, next to that of Veronika Huber, a woman executed for murdering her child. They share the space with rail workers, fishermen, bandits, soldiers, and the unidentified dead, as well as a few stranger cases. There's the cranium of Andrew Sokolov, a member of an extreme religious sect who died following the order's dire requirement of self-emasculation, and the skull of Girolamo Zini, a 20-year-old tightrope walker who, the museum's deadpan delivery tells us, died of atlantoaxial dislocation, broken neck. These crania aren't the only bones in the Mutter's expansive and historic collection. In addition to housing slices of Einstein's brain and larger-than-life replicas of every eye injury imaginable, which sympathy pain prevented me from giving any more than a sideways glance, the Mutter Museum is home to the towering skeleton of the Mutter American giant, the remains of a woman so tightly corseted for so long that the garments changed the very structure of her bones, and dozens of other people whose final act is to educate the rest of us about what lives inside. This is a place populated by the remarkable dead, a medical mausoleum with a 19th century aesthetic that would make a Victorian-era anatomy student feel right at home. There's more than a touch of the Gothic about the rows of cases, not to mention a sinister feeling that you, too, might have been eyed for an exhibit had you lived during the museum's heyday. Anatomists of old would often let their ethics slip if it meant acquiring another remarkable specimen for their cabinets. These bones have taken on a second life, and that's part of the story as much as the lives stripped down and presented among the cases and shelves. Every bone in the collection embodies a tangle of stories leading from the present back through history, and deeper still, through the millions of years of evolutionary assembly that made us into our present and still changing form. In each skeleton, whether that person was privileged or poor, healthy or afflicted, there are stories of varied and resilient life. Admittedly, I hadn't paid very close attention to human bones before my visit to the Mutter that cold February morning. My affection for bones had its origin in paleontology. I lived just an hour from the Mutter for most of my life, and I always promised myself I'd visit at an unspecified sometime. When I found myself with enough time and cash to visit a museum, though, I'd always opt instead to go north on NJ Transit to visit the hulking frames of dinosaurs and other prehistoric oddities in Manhattan's American Museum of Natural History. Petrified bones of all shapes and sizes fascinated me, even more glorious raised and reconstructed in their life positions. That enduring affection led me to settle in the American West, where I spend weeks out of each summer helping museum and university field crews dig up fragile bones that throw open windows to lost worlds. It's difficult work. Out in the desert, science is a matter of stomping around crumbling outcrops in search of pieces of prehistoric lives that have miraculously survived to the present, using pick, shovel, brush, and plaster to uncover and cradle old bones before using whatever strength you can muster to drag them out of their natural tombs. All that manual labor offers plenty of time to think, of course, and the endless stream of questions that bones inspire helps those racked with fossil fever endure sunburn, gnat bites, dehydration, and cactus needles that seem to know the exact weak spot of your boots. What was this creature? What did it look like? How did it move? What did it eat? These are puzzles that can be answered through bone. Each element has stories to tell, a record of the organism's life wrapped up in its skeleton. To the paleontologist, bones are not grim visages of death. Skeletons are biological time capsules that tell us of lives we'll never see in the flesh. A tooth, a string of vertebrae, an osteoderm that once acted as bony armor inside the skin. These were all living tissues that had to grow and were constantly changing within the bodies of the animals they once belonged to. Even the tiniest, most boring fragment of unidentifiable Chunkosaurus gradually turning to powder beneath the unforgiving sun is a vestige of a life come, gone, and preserved for a span of time that's impossible to truly understand. It's difficult to push away thoughts about life while facing death. This is as true for us as it was for Tyrannosaurus. Gently, insistently interrogating the remains of long-dead creatures makes every tidbit of information drawn from their skeletons a treasure. We don't get to see them in life, so bones are most of what we have. Tracks and traces form a supplement to the skeletons. The entire paleontological discipline is based on resurrecting the extinct, if only in our minds. With our own bones, though, the connection flips. We intimately experience life and are familiar with all the squishy tissues that skeletons support. With the knowledge of the living, then, the meaning of human bones is often pulled inside out. A skull is a death's head, reminding us of what awaits us all. As I am now, so will you be. As you are now, so once was I. That's what human skeletal remains repeat to us over and over again. Just think of where we see skeletons and skulls around us. A skull and crossbones marks the menacing flutter of the Jolly Roger. A similar symbol warns us we'll die if we're careless about what containers we drink from. Heavy metal album covers are rife with skeletons, as are the ranks of fictional villains, from Skeletor to the bony army in the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. Tattooed onto my left forearm, a werewolf grips the skull of one of her victims in an anthropomorphic memento mori. Even death itself comes to us as a robed skeleton. One of the few positive cultural associations with skeletons we seem to have is the Mexican Dia de los Muertos, a holiday when sugar skulls and other osteological adornments help keep the living in touch with the memory of those who have left us. But that's largely an exception to our modern relationship with bones. While prehistoric remains represent life resurrected and reassembled, we often think of our own bones as potent symbols of the afterlife and what misfortune may come to snatch us away into it. Still, deep down, we can't escape the fact that bones are the most vital of structures. They form the foundation of our lives from the outset. We don't squeeze out of our mothers fully formed, all of our 206-some-odd bones in place. No, when we start life, our bones still have to fully ossify and fuse. Years and years of development and growth ahead of us that will alter our skeletons as the years tick by. Our bones change throughout our childhood and adolescence, eventually bringing us to our full stature, and if we are lucky enough to reach old age, they can even turn against us, resorbing themselves.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?